Well, hello everyone. I'm Zana and thrilled to be here in Noosa Arts Theatre with Mr. David Williamson, Australia's most popular and widely performed playwright. And it's a little gem of a theatre, Queensland's Sunshine Coast, a theatre of which you, David, are patron. Thanks for coming along to have a chat.
It's a pleasure, Zana.
And for someone who is supposed to be retired, you have no less than 3 new plays opening this year. And around us, literally, the set is being built for the world premiere of Aria. Before we get to that, we have time to discuss some of your earlier work, the work that really set you up for success. Because here in Noosa, it's a long way from those heady days in Melbourne when your career was just beginning. And in particular, I'd like to reflect on some of your powerhouse productions of the 1970s and early 80s, a time which came to be known as the Australian New Wave. And it was a term used both in theatre and in film. Can we begin with The Removalists, which in 1972 won Best Stage Play and Script at the Australian Writers Guild Awards. And then there was the film. And the themes that you explored, the abuse of power, domestic violence, are still so relevant today. The Removalists was a landmark in your career. What do you think you learned from that? And how do you look back on that now?
Well, I look back on it. What I learned was that that earlier on, I'd had a couple of plays at La Mama that hadn't worked very well. The audience either went to sleep, walked out, or so what I learned early on was that you can't bore an audience. That dramatic momentum was important. If you're going to tell a story on stage, you can't have people lecturing the audience. You can't have extraneous diversions. You've got to get on with the story and tell it, and that's what I did in The Removalists. The germ of the story came from an actual story told to me by a removalist as I was helping him shift my furniture, and I thought, good heavens, that's the stuff of drama. I pushed it further in the play, but yeah, what interested me was the removalist attitude to seeing the police rough up Kenny Carter. He thought it was great entertainment, an unusually interesting afternoon. And I thought, well, civil liberties don't play much of a part in his life, and it's really a very black satire on the very worst aspects of Australian male behaviour. It was seen as a searing indictment of police brutality, but in fact Kenny Carter was just as bad as the old sergeant.
Mm. Still so relevant, the drama of everyday life.
Well, domestic violence, as you say, hasn't abated. In fact, it seems to have got worse over those 55 years or so since the play was written. The actual stats are even worse now than they were back then. So that says something about our society.
Something to reflect on. Let's also talk about Don's Party. Don's Party was your play about an election night party. It was a real hit in 1976, and it was eventually performed all around the world. And then it became an award-winning film. Among a tranche of film industry awards in 1977, Don's Party won for you Best Screenplay. Can you share some of the highlights of that?
Well, Don's Party was a very accurate reflection of the parties of the time, which doesn't say much for Australian manners or male behaviour. But it is a satire. Again, it's a satire of very bad behaviour in suburbia. It's a comedy, but I think it accurately reflects the attitudes of the time. Hopefully we've moved on a little from from some of those, but it I thought it'd never be staged because it has bad language, it has bad behaviour, very accurate. But I thought, this is never going to be staged, but I'm going to be truthful. I'm going to write it as I have experienced it. And lo and behold, within a couple of years, the censorship laws changed and it was on stage.
Fantastic. And then you followed up that success with The Club, which also began life on stage before transforming into a film in 1980, directed by Bruce Beresford. And The Club gave us, as the audience, a fascinating look behind the locker room doors of Australian rules football. And in the play, the identity of the sports club was quite generic. It could have been any AFL club. Whereas in the film, you took over Collingwood Football Club and you took all the action out into the stadium. That must have been both quite challenging and exciting. So what made this film, in your words, as you once said, one of the best made from your work?
Well, I think it helps to have a very good director like Bruce Beresford for a start, and he took it seriously. He said, this is a play about sport. I'm going to have the sport on screen and I'm going to have it played well. So he took the two young stars, Harold Hopkins and John Howard at the time, and they trained with Collingwood for 6 weeks. John Howard got so good that Tommy Hafey, the coach, offered him a place in the seconds, and he said, you could make it to the firsts, but John stuck with acting. But those scenes were very well done. But the play was essentially not so much about Australian rules, it was about politics in general. It's about manoeuvring, backstabbing, the quest for power, the quest for glory, enduring themes which I think permeate the film and which make it not just a film about sport.
Yes, still very current. And sometimes great opportunities come along. In the early 1980s, director Peter Weir gave you his outline for a film on our national topic, Gallipoli. You turned his ideas into a script, and it went through many drafts before shooting. In your hands, it became a very moving, personal, individual story of two soldiers. The film then went on to wipe out the Australian Film Industry Awards in 1981 in a number of categories and winning for you Best Screenplay. It's now regarded as an Australian classic. It must have been rather daunting handling a topic which is a national icon. What did you think about that then, and have views changed since?
Well, I was very lucky. Peter is a great filmmaker and has a great sense of casting, working with actors, visual imagery, and he's a huge talent. And to be working with Peter was a great experience. We did collaborate on the script. He was always there, commenting, being part of the process. And yes, to be true to one of our great national moments was a bit daunting. We started out as massive documentary type film, taking in every aspect of but gradually realized that this has to be drama. So we whittled it down to basically the story of two young lads, played by Mel Gibson and Mark Lee, again inspired casting by Peter. He took me into the screening room to see a rushes of a screen test of a young actor called Mel Gibson. He said, have a look at this. And I looked and he said, we've got to grab him now. He's going to be an international star in a couple of years. And he was right.
What great memories. Perhaps it's hard for many Australians to realise these days, but 50 years ago, we were more used to hearing English and American actors and accents on our stage and screen than Australians. Your productions burst onto the scene with their brash Aussie characters, revealing our way of life like never before. In fact, there were so many productions in the 1970s and 80s, it got its own name and came to be called the Australian New Wave, a term that's referred to both in the theatre and in film. And you, David, appeared to surf the new wave very successfully. What do you think of the new wave now?
Well, it's hard for young people to realise how locked out of storytelling Australian writers were. There were very few Australian plays on stage, one every 10 years maybe. There was no film industry to speak of. There was a glimmer of television, a few cop shows, but basically Australians never saw their own stories told, their own accents they never heard. It was all English theatre with a little bit of European and a little bit of American. And the film industry, if there was a film shot in Australia, it was shot by like some of the 17th doll American actors playing Australian leads. So it was a breakthrough, and it was a lot of anger that we couldn't tell our own stories on stage. So when Betty Birstall came back and opened a theatre dedicated to finding new writing, I think that started the explosion. Betty said, look, if you don't look for new writing, it'll never appear. And no one was looking for it.
What an innovator.
Yeah.
An unsung hero, perhaps.
Yes, she was. Yeah.
David, we're going to accelerate through the following decades of your prolific career because you've written over 50 plays, right up to the here and now, because there's no slowing down. And you have no less than 3 new productions this year. And you have Aria in this very theatre. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yes, Aria is actually my Sydney play for 2025, but I said to my Sydney director, Mark, American and English writers get out-of-town tryouts. They never go straight to the capital. What about, we've got this wonderful little theatre up here, what about we do an out-of-town tryout here with a very good cast? And he said, go for it. So Noosa is getting to see this almost a year before Sydney, and it'll be, from what I've seen in rehearsal, a very fine production. But one of our best directors, Sam Coward, has collected a great Sunshine Coast cast.
Something to look forward to, and I do have tickets.
Well,
very excited.
I think it's going to be a fun play, yeah.
And Sydney, The Great Divide, has been storming the Ensemble Theatre currently. It's received glowing reviews. What issues are you tackling in The Great Divide?
The Great Divide looks at the great Australian myth that we're an egalitarian, fair and equal society. Well, we're not. In 1962, it was true. We had the second most even distribution of wealth in the world. Now we've got the second or third worst in the OECD. Of all the 30 countries, we are one of the most unequal. So when I see politicians get on the screen, as I saw just last night, Australia is the greatest country on earth. Well, it is if you're on the right side of the Great Divide. If you're on the wrong side, it's not so fine. And I thought it's time Australian drama had a look at the extreme differences in wealth. But I've got to make it into an appealing story. I can't just get out there and deliver a diatribe. So it's a story about a very wealthy developer who comes in and tries to transform a sleepy coastal town into the next Noosa or Byron Bay, which is happening all along the coast. And a local resident who is on the wrong side of the Great Divide finds out and decides, no, she's not having any of this. She's going to fight. It's David versus Goliath, and Goliath always wins in real life, but you can give David a bit of a go on stage.
Something to reflect on. And later this year, you have The Puzzle opening in Adelaide. An intriguing black comedy, I'm told, set on a lifestyle cruise. Can we assume it's satirical?
It is satirical. It's the story of a rather, well, ordinary accountant who feels, because his marriage broke up early, that he's lost touch with his 27-year-old daughter. So he thinks going on a holiday with her will give him a chance to get to know her better. Unfortunately, he chooses the wrong sort of cruise. He's fairly innocent and doesn't realise a lifestyle cruise is code word for a swingers cruise. And there are two other bored suburban couples trying to enliven their lives. And the way the six of these characters interact shows us how people who have everything in life that should make them happy still manage to make a mess of their lives. So yes, it is a satire.
Look out, Adelaide.
Yeah.
So David, you now appear to be surfing your very own new wave. You're still fearless in exploring social issues, analysing the ordinary dramas of everyday life, all of which create compelling productions that people absolutely love. And today we've just covered a small part of your remarkable career. David Williamson AO, it's been absolutely fascinating discussing your work that's shown us as Australians more about who we are and what we can be. On behalf of all the film and theatre lovers watching, we can't thank you enough.
Thank you very much, Zana. That's very nice of you.
Best wishes with your new productions.
Thanks a lot.